6 of Britain's most senior police chiefs are warning the Prime Minister that he won't be able to deliver his flagship crime-cutting pledges without serious investment. They say promises to halve knife crime, reduce violence against women and girls and recruit 13,000 additional officers are all at risk. They also warn the government's plan to release prisoners early could be a net detriment to public safety and undermine the criminal justice system. You have to remember, all of these areas are in tatters at the moment. The criminal justice system, what is happening with policing, police numbers, etc. Don't be totally fooled by an increase in numbers. That doesn't always fully equate. You know, people are recruited, people at the other end leave. We're going to talk to David Shipley in a moment, former prisoner and a prison justice campaigner. Let's first speak to Shabnam Chaudhri, former detective superintendent over there at Scotland Yard. Good afternoon to you, Shabnam. I mean, interesting, isn't it, that I said there at the beginning, it comes to something when you have to write a letter to a newspaper, 6 of you, in order to get the Prime Minister to try and listen. What's gone wrong?
Well, it's definitely very rare when you've got 6 of the most senior officers across UK policing from some of the biggest police forces in the UK that have had to write to the government because of they're raising serious concerns, and understandably so, with regards to one, the release of prisoners, but also the funding issue that they have. And I think you've just touched on something that is really, really important, and which is the recruitment and the retention of police officers. It's a bit like a revolving door at the moment. For as many that join policing, you have got as many leaving that are experienced officers, and you just can't get that experience back. Indeed.
I mean, the solution here, I suppose, based on their letter, is that the Prime Minister stumps up the right amount of cash.
Well, they've had 14 years of austerity, and remember, they've been working on the fact that they have had huge cutbacks, and the government now are just trying to play catch up. So in addition to playing catch up, they really need to try and stump up more funding for those forces in order for them to be able to resource their officers, to be able to have the right technology, the right skills and the right experience to be able to deal with what you call business as usual and the crimes that affect communities the most. For example, you talk about shoplifting, antisocial behaviour, criminal damage, motor vehicle crimes. All of these crimes are actually at the moment being neglected because they don't have the skills, the experience or the resources to be able to deal with them on a day-to-day basis. And key to that also is neighbourhood policing.
How did this... I mean, look, I know we lost a lot of cops back from 2010, and that was terrible. There's been, as we were just saying, there's been some recruitment, but it's not quite up to scratch. But, of course, what you end up with is, I suppose, far more inexperienced officers, not through any fault, just by dint of being new on the job. That's a disproportionate number set against the entire number of the entire police force in whatever area it happens to be. But you'd have thought it wouldn't be beyond the wit of mankind to be able to solve a burglary or turn up when someone's had their wallet and phone stolen in the street and given a smack in the chops while it was happening. Well, what's happened there that somehow stuff that was once seen as quite serious crime is almost ignored?
I think what happens is you lose focus on what's priority crimes, and stuff like the burglaries just get morphed into what you consider low-level crimes. Now, it might be low-level to police officers when you're dealing with it, but it's not to members of the public who are first time dealing with something where they've never been involved in or been a victim of a crime. And I think one of the other issues here is the lack of trust and confidence in police, for example. People don't want to join the police. It doesn't have the respect that it used to have. And there is so much scrutiny of police officers when you look at what goes on in social media. Many people that come into policing see the challenges, how difficult it is. Police officers that run to danger every single day of the week, that put their lives on the line, and then it's a bit of a thankless task. And they're thinking, actually, I could go and do a job and become a train driver, or I can go and do some other shift work, which pays equally the same, if not more money, and have less stress and actually not do this particular type of job. And that's some of the challenges that face policing at the moment.
And with a cost of living crisis, people perhaps will make those decisions that maybe a few years ago they wouldn't have done. They'd have thought, no, my heart is in being a police officer. I'll pursue it because that's what I really want to do. But today, I think those conversations, we all have them with, things being tricky, difficult, unaffordable, etc. You can see how people would gravitate outside what they thought was going to be their chosen occupation and go elsewhere. You make a good point. Shabnam, thank you very much indeed for your time as ever. That's Shabnam Chaudhri, former detective superintendent at Scotland Yard. Let's speak with David Shipley, former prisoner, now prison justice campaigner. David, good afternoon to you. I mean, there's a lot to look into on this. I said at the very beginning, and I didn't say this with any evidence, I was really just pondering the thought. Is it a case of, in terms of solving crime, we've just got to get tougher? Because there's a lot of voices saying, no, that's never the answer. Look, in America, all the police are armed, sentences are 5 billion years long, and goodness knows, doesn't make a jot of difference. But I guess there is a very real sense that we're sort of at the other end of the scale. Carrying a knife, nothing much happens. You can have drugs on you, nothing much happens. Shoplifting, nothing much happens. We seem to be in a really odd, almost criminal justice void at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of crime does ultimately arise from people who've had terrible childhoods and been victimized or hurt in different ways, and that is true, and we should be looking to engage with that. But at the other end of it, when we have people carrying knives, doing violence, being a threat to their fellow citizens, that's something we have to stop. And I think really what we see in the way the British state is now approaching all of this is it's just withdrawing. If you look at the charge rate, so this is what percentage of crimes with a victim, ignoring online fraud because there's a huge amount of that, no one knows what it's called, but crimes with a victim that actually result in someone being charged. If you go back 15 years, it was about 15%. Now it's less than half that.
Wow.
So just crime is much easier to get away with. And yes, you're absolutely right. With the new sentencing review approach, we're going to be looking at fewer short sentences, which means that it will take a more serious offence for someone to be sent to prison. And I think there's a real legitimate concern about this. If that time is used to divert people from crime and find a way to intervene with them, say stop offending, great. But it's not clear there's the support services there or the funding, and it might just mean more people being out on the street who will continue committing crimes.
And of course, this is something that I suppose the government thought they could solve or begin to solve. But now you've got 6 of Britain's most senior police officers saying we're not going to be able to solve any of this because the money is simply not there to do it.
Yeah, I think this is the problem. We've had a complete collapse in state capacity. And the police are right, they haven't got the numbers and the funding to police, but also there's I think a cultural issue there, a tendency to avoid trying to go after some of this crime and trying to prevent what's seen as low-level offending. And yes, the government's looking to increase the probation budget by 50%, which they need to. But the problem is, because this has all been forced on the government by the prisons crisis, they haven't got the time to do it properly. If you were doing this properly, and you were going to change sentencing this much, you'd probably say we need 3 years to scale up the police, scale up probation, scale up addiction services, and then we'll change the sentencing policy and the support networks will be there. Doing it or trying to do it all at once, I think, is astonishingly risky.
Indeed, and if the money isn't forthcoming, the amount that is required, as these top police officers have said, then pledges to cut crime, pledges to address serious violence against women and girls, and even recruitment of officers. All of that goes out the window. So you and I will be having a conversation in 5 years' time where all of the figures we're talking about now, based on this, David, will be far worse.
I think that's likely, yes. I think the problem we have is that right now the system isn't coping. If the idea is to reduce crime, that will have to mean arresting more people. May ultimately mean jailing more people. And simultaneously, the government wants to reduce the prison population. It's very hard to see, without a huge amount of other funding and different options, how you simultaneously arrest more people, catch more criminals, stop more crime, and jail fewer people and reduce the prison population. Yeah.
I always said, after lockdown, and bear with me on this, David, after lockdown happened, that never again, bearing in mind an entire nation and the wider world, but let's just take us, an entire nation, was closed on and off for a couple of years. Everything shut, schools shut, workplaces closed, businesses never recovered, never reopened, kids' mental health, God knows what. But the government took the most dramatic, and as we look at it now, draconian and arguably ineffective way of dealing with something, but it was a big decision. Never again can the government say, oh, we can't do that, because we know they are capable of making a big decision if they need to. Could they not apply the same energy and rigour to something like criminal justice that they applied to a pandemic? We might get somewhere then.
I would tend to agree. I think that the thing our political class, our civil service and our governing class generally lack is the will. You know, they aren't willing to really engage with the problems, the huge problems that our society faces. They have lived for decades in this world of the post Cold War consensus, you know, post Thatcher, post Blair consensus, and they don't seem to have it in them to recognise that the world is different now. And we actually need to think and solve real problems. And you see this in crime, you see it in our inability to build infrastructure, you see it in our inability to control our borders, you know, the energy policy that's a disaster, the crumbling state of our military. I think our ruling class lack the will to solve these problems.
And I guess it all comes down to finances ultimately. I mean, there's lots of other elements and kind of tentacles to a very complex story, but fundamentally more money will certainly on the face of it begin to address the issues. And if the police are saying, look, we've got a feeling we're not going to get this money and we're stuffed, I mean, the Prime Minister has got time to act on this before it gets any worse. But politically, I mean, the smart money says, well, he's not going to impart more money to this area because there is none left. We can't raise taxes because they've said we can't raise taxes, or they've raised quite a lot of things. I mean, I guess some political parties would say, well, you know, cancel big projects. Yesterday we had Reform talking about net zero. That might be, I don't know whether that's the answer to it. It might be a temporary answer, not specifically that area, but it just strikes me the 21st century, here we are, and solving this problem that was never as bad as this is beyond the wit of mankind or the collective wisdom of our political masters, David.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? The government's inherited a justice system that was broken under the Tories, and, you know, this has been a crisis that's decades in the making, so it's not actually their fault, but it's their problem to solve.
Yeah.
And I think the reality is there does need to be more spending on policing and also more spending on support services. One of the big issues is that a lot of people who end up in prison are actually profoundly mentally ill and should be in secure treatment environments, which we don't really have at scale anymore. And that is a lot of money. But actually, that's a problem that is only going to be solved by funding it. But yeah, we're in an environment where, you know, the junior doctors are talking about another strike if they don't get a whacking pay rise again this year. And Labour, when they came in, were quick to hand out pay rises. So I think that there's a reasonable assumption amongst a lot of the unions that if they threaten strikes, they might get more. So they will continue to do that. And Labour in a really tough place.
If you were sitting there around the Home Secretary's table, David, right now, Keir Starmer at the other end, having a bit of a powwow on this, you speak from experience. What would be your advice to them? What would be the first thing you would say in terms of at least beginning the process of getting this immovable object addressed?
I think we need to target a number of things. That there is a early years factor here, right? So 25% of people who end up in prison have been in the care system at some point. So for the mid and long term, we need to be looking at actually engaging with those kids who are having really tough starts in lives to make sure they don't end up disturbed, angry, addicted, and committing crime. That won't change things for 5 or 10 years. I do think in terms of policing, we need to police more effectively and almost more aggressively, in that a lot of evidence shows it's not the length of sentence that deters people, it's the chance of being caught. And, you know, where there's a charge rate of 6%, actually for most crimes, you've got quite a low chance of being caught.
Yeah.
And, you know, criminals being rational will factor that in. So I think increasing the chance of being caught would actually be an effective lever. And it might then mean that we could go for shorter prison sentences, because I think most of us, if we knew that 75% of crimes were being solved and people were being punished, we might accept that actually that meant slightly lower sentences on average if we knew everyone was being caught. And I think those are the key levers here that we need to be looking at, and making sure that the prison system is cleaned up morally, so it stops being a place where people get addicted to drugs or more addicted and get harmed, and actually becomes a place where people learn good skills.
Spot on. David, thank you as ever. Really appreciate your time, sir. David Shipley, he is a former prisoner himself, now a prison justice campaigner.